Hey guys, welcome to Imminent Thread Solutions and our Knot of the Week series in HD. We've concluded our bends portion of the Knot of the Week in HD, and today we're going to be moving on to loops. We're going to be starting with the overhand loop, the stopped loop, as well as the bowline. And I do pronounce it bowline, and I'll explain why. There's nothing wrong with saying bowline, but that's kind of a point of contention for a while with knot enthusiasts, so we'll explain that as well. Let's get into it. Okay, with the overhand loop, it's a way to tie a simple fixed loop into a rope or a line. So what you're first going to do is form a bight in the rope, just like so, and you're just going to tie an overhand knot with that bight. So you'll wind up with something like this. So again, you can tie this loop as big or as short as you need it to. One thing about this though is that it can be difficult to untie once it's loaded. So once you get a load and this starts to tighten, it can be a little bit difficult to untie. But it is a very quick way to form a fixed loop in a line. Okay, with this stop loop, I not only wanted to show you how to tie this, but almost to discourage you from using it just because there's better options out there. It's not as strong or secure as even the overhand loop, and it can be even harder to tie than the overhand loop as well. So first off, what you're going to need to tie this is just an overhand knot, and then in the end of the line with the working end you'll put another overhand knot. So this overhand knot in the end is going to act as a stopper. So you'll loosen the original overhand knot up a little bit, slip through the stopper, and then tighten. So that stopper acts as the stopper to form the loop in the stop loop. So one thing you can see right off the bat is that it can loosen up on you, and obviously if you're not paying attention it can even work and pull through. So like I said, there's better options. If you just want a quick way to form a fixed loop, go with the overhand loop. Alright, so by far the bowline is my favorite knot. It's sometimes referred to as the king of the knots. But I say bowline because of the nomenclature coming from the line that holds the edge of a sail towards the bow of the ship, which if you know bow and stern, bow is the front of the ship. So it holds that sail towards the bow and into the wind. You wouldn't say it's the bow of the ship and the stern of the ship, you would say bow. So that's why I pronounce it bowline. Sometimes it's even written with two words instead of one, though, kind of popular nomenclature is to say bowline. There's nothing wrong with that. Just explaining the way that I pronounce it and why. So first off, we'll tie this bowline, and then I'll kind of get into some of the applications of it too. So I tie this bowline a little unique. Some people tie it differently, but I've always formed an overhand Q, and that's how I teach myself, or taught myself, to tie this, as well as kind of remember how to tie it as well. So again, I twist that Q in, and then this line here comes around the object that I'm tying onto. So what's great about a bowline is that you can tie this onto an object, whereas with the double overhand knot, you're limited to tying onto an object and things like that. So that's why this is such a versatile way to tie a fixed loop, because the loop isn't going to close, slip, or bind around an object. So again, I'll form that Q in the line, and then I'll come over around the object through the back of that loop that I've just created, and then around the back of the standing part and back through the top of that loop. Now the checkpoint for this is that as you tighten, so you'll grab these two lines and this line and tighten, you want this line to be on the inside of the loop or the fixed loop that you've just created. So if it's on the outside, you've tied that incorrectly. And one reason for that is, which I'll show in a second, is that that's how you'll back up the knot. You don't want it on the other side. So let me show that again here. So one more time, twist the Q, around through the back, around the standing part, and back through. And again, grabbing the loop in that working end, tightening like that for the bowline. So let's talk about some ways to back this up. There's a couple ways I'd recommend to back this up. One is just basically a double overhand knot. So we'll tie the bowline again. And as you can see, I've got a lot more cordage this time to use to tie with. So if you remember from the fisherman's knot, or the double fisherman's knot, we're going to go around, over, and back through. As you can see, I still almost don't have enough cordage here. And then tighten. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working this down towards the base of the bowline, because you want this to be as close as it can to the actual bowline, because it's acting as a stopper to keep it from backing through. So that's one method of backing up. Okay, so let's talk about the last way to back up the bowline, which is a bowline with a Yosemite. So again, we'll twist our cue, form our loop, come back through. And again, I've got myself plenty of slack here to tie the Yosemite. So what we're going to do is, remember how I mentioned that you want this working end to be parallel or to the inside of that fixed loop. What we're actually going to do now is take it back outside of that fixed loop, like this, to start the Yosemite. Then it will come back around like this, so almost following that line right there. And it's going to come through the body of the bowline like this. So that is the bowline with the Yosemite backup. And one thing you can do from this point too is, an additional backup. You can even come back to that same thing we were doing on the inside. You could even back this up even further. So, 2 is 1, 1 is none, right? So there's another backup in it too. Again, bowline with the Yosemite. Okay, so as I mentioned, the bowline is great because it's a fixed loop that won't close, slip, or even bind around an object, and that could be a waist, an arm, etc. So it's really a great line for rescue applications too. This would be something you could throw to somebody. They would have a fixed loop that they could put over themselves and you could pull them to safety. We will be getting into the one-handed bowline too, which is something that an actual victim can tie around themselves if they're in a rescue situation too, or having to be rescued. So again, one of the reasons, or one of the ways that I use this is, commonly I'll use this with a tarp. So if I'm rigging a tarp, what I'll do is I'll take a grommet and I'll put a bowline through a grommet. So I'll start from this point here, I'll put this through the grommet hole, and then back through and tie the bowline onto one end, and then with the opposite end, so that'll be my fixed loop, and then with the opposite end I'll tie a taut line hitch, and that will give me my kind of adjustable way of tying down the tarp, because you need to adjust the tension on a tarp too with wind and things like that. So those are just a couple ways of using a bowline. It's easily untied, but it can't be tied or untied when under load. So one thing that means that if you've got this mooring a ship or something like that, you've got this under heavy tension, you're not going to be able to untie it when it's under heavy tension. So, and then again, if the line itself is under heavy tension, you can't just twist a bowline into it. So again, that's another way to tie it too. Instead of that cue method, you could actually twist a bowline into a line instead of starting out like that. So if this line were under tension, you wouldn't necessarily be able to pull on the line to start the bowline. So those are some of the disadvantages of the bowline, but as a whole, it still is the king of the knots, and if you're going to learn one knot, highly recommend it's the bowline. Thanks for watching the ITS Knot of the Week. Be sure to check out itstactical.com to learn more, or click the description below to get a direct link to the site.